It was a rainy afternoon in the heart of downtown, the kind where the city buzzes with umbrellas and hurried footsteps. The CEO of one of the largest tech companies in the country, Mr. Jonathan Reed, sat behind his sleek mahogany desk, staring out at the grey skies through floor-to-ceiling windows. He had just wrapped up a long day of meetings, but something about this particular day felt heavier than usual. Maybe it was the storm outside, or maybe it was the nagging sense that life always seemed to throw curveballs when you least expected them. Little did he know, the next hour would change everything, not just for him, but for someone else whose life was hanging by a thread. The knock on his office door came unexpectedly. His assistant wasn't supposed to let anyone disturb him during. This time, he'd been clear about needing some space to review quarterly reports before heading home. But there she stood, a little girl, no older than 10, clutching a crumpled piece of paper in her small hands. Her oversized coat dripped rainwater onto the polished marble floor, and her wide eyes darted nervously around the room. She looked so out of place in the luxurious setting, like a bird caught in a gilded cage. Jonathan blinked twice, unsure if he was imagining things. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice tinged with both curiosity and confusion. Her name was Emily, as she shyly introduced herself after clearing her throat. She explained, in a trembling yet determined tone, that she had come for a job interview. At first, Jonathan thought it might be some sort of prank orchestrated by one of his colleagues, perhaps even his mischievous younger brother who worked in marketing, but the sincerity in her voice stopped him cold. This wasn't a joke. Emily's words were careful, measured, as though she'd rehearsed them over and over again. She held up the crumpled paper, which turned out to be a neatly handwritten application letter addressed to him personally. Listed skills like hard worker, good listener, and willing to learn. Something about the way she carried herself, the quiet strength beneath her nervous exterior made Jonathan pause. As they talked, Jonathan learned more about Emily's situation. Her mother, Sarah, had been working 2 jobs to make ends meet, ever since Emily's father passed away 3 years ago. But now, Sarah was in the hospital, and Emily didn't know how much longer they could keep their tiny apartment. Rent was due soon, bills were piling up, and Emily wanted to help however she could. That's why she'd decided to apply for a job at Jonathan's company. She figured if she could earn some money, maybe she could ease the burden on her mum, even just a little bit. Her innocence and bravery struck a chord deep within Jonathan, stirring memories he'd long buried under layers of corporate ambition and success. Jonathan couldn't shake off the feeling that there was more to Emily's story than what she was telling him. There was a shadow in her eyes, a weight far too heavy for someone her age to carry alone. He leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on his desk, and asked gently, "How is your mum doing? Is she going to be okay?" Emily hesitated, biting her lower lip as tears welled up in her eyes. She whispered, almost too softly for him to hear, "The doctors say she needs surgery, but we don't have enough money for it." The air in the room grew thick with unspoken tension. Jonathan felt his stomach drop. He knew all too well how medical expenses could crush families, especially those already struggling to stay afloat. What happened next surprised even Jonathan himself. Instead of dismissing Emily's request or calling security to escort her out, he found himself asking questions, real ones, not the polite kind reserved for boardroom conversations. He wanted to understand her world, to see beyond the polished glass walls of his skyscraper office. And, as Emily spoke, painting a picture of her life through fragments of stories about her mum's sacrifices and their modest home filled with love despite its emptiness. Jonathan realized something profound. This wasn't just about a little girl trying to save her family. It was about resilience, hope, and the lengths people go to protect the ones they love. But then, as Emily reached into her coat pocket and pulled out an old photograph of her mum, something clicked in Jonathan's mind. He froze, his breath catching. In his throat, the woman in the photo looked eerily familiar, almost like someone he hadn't seen in decades. A memory flashed before his eyes, a distant past he'd tried hard to forget. Before he could process what it meant, Emily noticed his reaction and tilted her head curiously. "Do you know my mum?" she asked innocently, unaware of the storm brewing inside Jonathan. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. All he could do was stare at the photo, his mind racing with questions he didn't yet have answers. The silence stretched on, broken only by the rhythmic patter of rain against the windows. Emily shifted uncomfortably in her chair, sensing that something significant had shifted in the room. Jonathan finally managed to find his voice, though it sounded distant and strained even to his own ears. I need to look into something," he murmured, standing abruptly from his seat. He moved toward the door, pausing only briefly to glance back at Emily. "Wait here," he instructed, his tone firm but not unkind. As he stepped out into the hallway, his thoughts were a whirlwind. Could it really be her, after all these years? And if it was, what did that mean for him, for Emily, for the fragile thread connecting them? Back in the office, Emily sat quietly, hugging her knees to her chest. She didn't fully understand what had just happened, but she could feel the gravity of the moment pressing down on her. For the first time since walking into the towering building, doubt crept into her mind. What if she'd made a mistake coming here? What if this man, this powerful stranger, wouldn't help? The weight of responsibility bore down on her tiny shoulders, threatening to overwhelm her. Yet, amidst the fear, there was also a flicker of hope. Something about the way Mr. Reed had reacted gave her the sense that maybe, just maybe, her visit hadn't been in vain. Meanwhile, Jonathan paced the length of his private conference room, his mind replaying snippets of his childhood. The woman in the photograph, it couldn't be a coincidence. He remembered the laughter, the warmth, the bond they once shared. But he also remembered the pain, the betrayal, the years of silence that followed. If it truly was her, then fate had played a cruel trick on them both. He clenched his fists, torn between anger and disbelief. Why now? Why like this? He knew. He needed answers, but the path ahead felt treacherous, littered with emotions he wasn't sure he was ready to confront. When Jonathan returned to his office, his expression was unreadable. Emily looked up at him expectantly, her big brown eyes searching his face for any sign of reassurance. He took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "Emily," he began, his voice steady but laced with emotion, "there's something I need to tell you about your mum." The room seemed to hold its breath as he spoke, each word carrying the weight of untold secrets. But before he could reveal anything further, his phone buzzed loudly on the desk, interrupting the moment. It was an urgent call from the hospital. Jonathan glanced at the screen, then back at Emily, torn between duty and destiny. "I'll be right back," he promised, stepping aside to take the call. On the other end of the line, a doctor delivered news that sent chills down Jonathan's spine. Sarah's condition had worsened overnight, and without immediate intervention, the prognosis was grim. The cost of the surgery was astronomical. far beyond what most insurance plans would cover. Jonathan listened intently, his grip tightening on the phone. When the call ended, he stood motionless for a moment, processing the gravity of the situation. Turning back to Emily, he saw the same vulnerability in her gaze that he'd seen countless times in his own reflection during his darkest days. He knew what he had to do, but doing it would mean opening doors he'd spent years locking shut. As Jonathan re-entered the office, Emily immediately sensed the shift in his demeanor. His usual confidence was replaced by a mix of determination and hesitation, as though he were wrestling with a decision too monumental to articulate. Sitting back down across from her, he folded his hands on the desk and met her gaze directly. "Emily," he said softly, "your mom is very sick and she needs our help. But I need you to trust me, okay? I'm going to do everything I can to make sure she gets the care she deserves." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes again, but this time they were tears of relief mixed with uncertainty. "Why are you helping us?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jonathan smiled faintly, though the sadness lingered in his eyes. "Because sometimes," he replied, "life gives US second chances." Before Jonathan could elaborate, another knock sounded at the door. This time it was his assistant, holding a folder marked urgent. Inside, he found documents detailing Sarah's medical records, financial struggles, and employment history. As he flipped through the pages, one line jumped out at him: her previous workplace. It was a name he recognized instantly, a company he'd acquired years ago. Coincidence? Or was this another piece of the puzzle linking him to Emily and her mum? He closed the folder slowly, his mind spinning with possibilities. Whatever the truth was, he knew it was bigger than all of them, and the answers lay somewhere in the tangled web of their shared past. The first light of dawn filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across Jonathan's office. He hadn't slept a wink, his mind racing with questions that seemed to multiply faster than answers. The text message from the unknown number gnawed at him like an open wound, its cryptic warning echoing in his thoughts. Who could have sent it? And why now, when everything felt so precarious? He glanced over at Emily, who was curled up on the couch where he'd let her rest. She looked peaceful, her chest rising and falling gently. But Jonathan couldn't shake the image of her wide, worried eyes from earlier. She trusted him to fix something far beyond his usual realm of influence. It wasn't just about money or resources anymore. It was about unraveling layers of history he'd buried deep inside. Jonathan's gaze drifted to the folder still sitting on his desk. He picked it up again, flipping through the pages as if hoping they might rearrange themselves into clarity. Sarah's employment history caught his attention once more. Her last job had been at Innovatech Solutions, a small tech startup that Jonathan's company had acquired nearly 8 years ago. Back then, it had been a hostile takeover, one of many in his relentless climb to the top. He remembered the faces of the employees during the transition meetings, some angry, some resigned, all powerless against the tide of corporate inevitability. Could Sarah have been among them? If so, what did she think of him now? Did she even know the role he'd played in dismantling her livelihood? His thoughts turned inward, dredging up memories he'd rather forget. 8 years ago, Jonathan had been different, not softer, exactly, but less jaded. He'd still been driven by ambition, but there had been moments when he questioned whether the ends justified the means. That changed after a particularly bitter fallout with someone close to him, someone whose name he hadn't allowed himself to speak since. Was it possible that Sarah's story intersected with his own in ways he couldn't yet comprehend? The photograph Emily had shown him lingered in his mind, haunting him. The resemblance was undeniable, but he needed proof before jumping to conclusions. Proof, and perhaps closure. As Emily stirred awake, stretching her arms and blinking sleepily, Jonathan set the folder aside. "Good morning," he said softly, trying to mask the turmoil beneath his calm exterior. She sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes. "Morning," she replied, her voice tinged with apprehension. "Did you figure anything out?" Jonathan hesitated, unsure how much to share. "I've made some calls," he said finally. "Your mum is going to get the care she needs, but there are complications." Emily frowned, sensing his unease. "What kind of complications?" she asked, her tone sharper than before. Jonathan sighed, leaning back in his chair. "It's complicated," he admitted, "but I promise we'll figure it out together." Emily didn't look entirely convinced, but she nodded anyway. "Okay," she said quietly. "Thank you." There was a weight behind her gratitude, one that reminded Jonathan of the immense responsibility resting on his shoulders. He knew he couldn't let her down, not when she'd placed her trust in him so completely. Yet every step forward seemed to unearth new obstacles. The anonymous text message loomed large in his mind, a reminder that not everyone wanted this. Puzzle solved. Whoever had sent it clearly had a vested interest in keeping certain truths hidden. But why, and what were they afraid of? To distract himself, Jonathan decided to dig deeper into Sarah's past. With Emily's permission, he accessed public records and old news articles, piecing together fragments of her life before the hospital stay. What he found both intrigued and troubled him. Sarah had worked tirelessly to provide for her family, taking odd jobs wherever she could find them after losing her position at Innovative. Neighbors described her as kind and resilient, always putting others before herself. One article mentioned her involvement in a local charity aimed at helping single parents navigate financial hardships, a cause that struck a chord with Jonathan. He wondered if Sarah's struggles mirrored those of other families impacted by corporate takeovers, including his own. Meanwhile, Emily watched him work, her curiosity growing with each passing moment. "Why are you looking into my mum's past?" she asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Jonathan paused, considering his response. "Because I think understanding her story will help us help her," he explained. "Sometimes the past holds clues to the present." Emily nodded thoughtfully, though her expression remained guarded. "Do you think you'll find something bad?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jonathan hesitated, torn between honesty and reassurance. "I don't know," he admitted, "but whatever we find, we'll face it together." Just as Jonathan was about to delve further into his research, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from Dr. Patel, the surgeon overseeing Sarah's case. "Mr. Reed," the doctor began without preamble, "we need to discuss next steps. Your authorization has expedited the process, but there's still the matter of consent." "Consent?" Jonathan frowned, confused. "Consent for what?" he asked. "For the experimental procedure," Dr. Patel replied. "It's risky, but it offers the best chance of recovery. However, we can't proceed without explicit approval from the patient or a legal guardian." Jonathan's stomach sank. Procedures meant uncharted territory, potential complications, and no guarantees. How could he ask Emily to make such a decision? When he relayed the information to Emily, her reaction surprised him. Instead of panic or fear, she squared her shoulders and met his gaze head on. "If it gives my mom a chance," she said firmly, Then we have to try. Her resolve left Jonathan speechless. At her age, most kids would be overwhelmed by the gravity of the situation, yet here she was, ready to shoulder the burden. It was humbling and terrifying. "Are you sure?" he asked gently. "Once we go down this road, there's no turning back." Emily nodded, her jaws set with determination. "I'm sure," she said. "My mum would do the same for me." With Emily's agreement secured, Jonathan authorized the procedure, though the weight of the decision pressed heavily on him. As he hung up with Dr. Patel, another piece of the puzzle fell into place. A name surfaced in Sarah's medical records. Dr. Evelyn Harper, a specialist consulted during her initial diagnosis. Jonathan recognized the name instantly. It belonged to an old mentor of his, someone he hadn't spoken to in years. Could Evelyn hold the key to understanding Sarah's condition, and perhaps the connection between them all? Without wasting a moment, Jonathan dialed her number, his heart pounding as the line rang. Evelyn answered on the third ring, her voice warm but wary. "Jonathan, is that really you?" she asked, surprise evident in her tone. "It's been a long time." Jonathan swallowed hard, steeling himself for the conversation ahead. "Evelyn, I need your help," he said, cutting straight to the point. "It's about a patient named Sarah Thompson. You treated her recently, didn't you?" There was a pause on the other end, followed by a sigh. "Yes, I did," Evelyn confirmed. "But Jonathan, this isn't just about medicine. There's more to her story than meets the eye." His pulse quickened. "Tell me everything," he urged, "please." What followed was a revelation that left Jonathan reeling. Evelyn revealed that Sarah's condition wasn't entirely physical. It stemmed from years of untreated stress and trauma, exacerbated by circumstances Evelyn hinted were tied to Jonathan's past actions. "I won't sugarcoat it," she said gravely. "Her body is giving out because her spirit has been fighting too long. And Jonathan, you're part of that fight, whether you realize it or not." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. Guilt surged within him, mingling with anger and regret. Had his decisions indirectly contributed to Sarah's suffering? Was this karma coming full circle as Evelyn continued speaking, detailing Sarah's resilience and quiet strength? Jonathan found himself grappling with emotions he hadn't faced in years. Memories of his own fractured relationships resurfaced, reminding him of the people he'd hurt along the way. Evelyn's voice softened as she added, "She's remarkable, Jonathan. Just like someone else I used to know." The implication wasn't lost on him. "You mean?" He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Evelyn sighed again. "I'll leave that to you to discover. But I will say this. Sometimes redemption comes when you least expect it." By the time the call ended, Jonathan felt drained, yet oddly hopeful. Evelyn's words had planted a seed of possibility, one he wasn't sure he deserved, but couldn't ignore. Turning to Emily, who had been listening intently, he forced a smile. "We're getting closer," he told her. "But there's still more to uncover." Emily studied him closely, her young eyes wise beyond their years. "You care about my mom, don't you?" she asked, catching him off guard. Jonathan hesitated, then nodded. "More than you know," he admitted. "And I'll do whatever it takes to make things right." But as the day wore on, the sense of being watched returned stronger than ever. Another text appeared on Jonathan's phone, this one even more ominous. "Stop digging. Some secrets are better left buried." His hands trembled as he read the words, his mind racing with possibilities. Who was behind these messages? And what did they stand to lose if the truth came to light? Beside him, Emily noticed his distress. "What's wrong?" she asked, concern etched on her face. Jonathan forced himself to breathe deeply, unwilling to let fear take hold. "Nothing," he lied. "Just stay close, okay?" As the day stretched into evening, Jonathan found himself pacing his office like a caged animal. The anonymous texts had stopped for now, but their chilling warnings lingered in the air, casting a shadow over every decision he made. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching them, waiting for the right moment to strike. Emily sat quietly at the edge of the couch, her legs tucked beneath her as she watched him move back and forth. She didn't ask questions anymore. Instead, her gaze carried an unspoken plea for reassurance. But how could he reassure her when he wasn't even sure what they were up against? Jonathan's mind kept circling back to Evelyn's cryptic words. "Redemption comes when you least expect it." What did she mean by that? Was it possible that Sarah's plight was more than just bad luck or poor health? Could it be tied to choices he'd made years ago, decisions he'd long since buried under layers of success and ambition? The idea gnawed at him, unsettling in its implications. If Sarah's suffering was somehow linked to his actions, then helping her wasn't just about fixing a problem, it was about making amends. And yet, the thought of facing whatever truths lay ahead filled him with dread. To distract himself, Jonathan turned his attention to another angle of the mystery: Innovetex Solutions. He pulled up old records from the acquisition, poring over employee files and financial reports. It didn't take long to find Sarah's name listed among the staff who had been let go after the takeover. Her position had been eliminated without severance pay, leaving her to fend for herself in a job market that was already unforgiving. As he read through the details, guilt twisted in his gut. At the time, he'd justified the cuts as necessary for growth, telling himself that sacrifices were part of building a successful company. But now, staring at Sarah's file, those justifications felt hollow. Emily noticed his growing tension and finally spoke up. "What are you looking at?" she asked softly, breaking the silence. Jonathan hesitated before turning the screen toward her. "This is your mom's work history," he explained. "She used to work for a company I acquired." Emily frowned, tilting her head as she studied the information. "You fired her?" she asked bluntly, her voice tinged with accusation. Jonathan winced at the word. "Not directly," he said carefully. "But yes, my decisions led to her losing her job." He braced himself for anger, perhaps even tears, but Emily surprised him again. After a moment of quiet contemplation, she nodded slowly. "That's why she worked so hard afterward," she murmured. "She never complained, but sometimes I could tell she was tired." Her calm acceptance hit Jonathan harder than any outburst could have. There was no judgment in her tone, only understanding and maybe a little sadness. It was as if she saw the bigger picture, the way life's challenges often stemmed from forces beyond individual control. Still, Jonathan couldn't ignore the role he'd played in creating those challenges. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, though the words felt woefully inadequate. "I didn't know what this would mean for people like your mum. If I had." He trailed off, unsure how to finish. Emily looked up at him, her expression thoughtful. "It doesn't matter now," she said simply. "What matters is what we do next." Her maturity astonished him. At 10 years old, she possessed a wisdom that many adults lacked. It made him wonder about Sarah, how she had raised such a remarkable child on her own, despite everything life had thrown at her, determined to learn more. Jonathan dug deeper into Sarah's personal history. He discovered fragments of her life before Inovetek, a marriage cut short by tragedy, a young daughter to raise alone, and dreams deferred in favor of survival. Each detail painted a clearer picture of the woman lying unconscious in a hospital bed, fighting for her life. But there was one piece missing: a connection between Sarah and Jonathan that went beyond the corporate world. The photograph Emily had shown him earlier haunted him still. The resemblance between Sarah and the woman in the photo was undeniable, but Jonathan couldn't place her face. Frustrated, he decided to reach out to an old friend who specialized in investigative journalism. Rachel Chen had a knack for uncovering hidden truths, and if anyone could help him connect the dots, it was her. When he called, Rachel answered. Immediately, her sharp voice cutting through the static. "Jonathan Reed," she said dryly. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Despite her teasing tone, Jonathan could hear genuine curiosity beneath the sarcasm. "I need your expertise," he admitted. "There's a story here, Rachel, and I think you're the only one who can help me unravel it." Rachel agreed to meet him later that night at a quiet cafe downtown. As Jonathan prepared to leave, Emily tugged gently on his sleeve. "Can I come too?" she asked, her eyes pleading. He hesitated, torn between keeping her safe and honoring her determination to be involved. Finally, he nodded. "Stay close," he warned, "and don't say anything unless I tell you to." Emily grinned, clearly thrilled to be included. Together, they stepped out into the cool night air, the city lights casting a soft glow around them at the cafe. Rachel waited at a corner table, her laptop open and a steaming cup of coffee beside her. She greeted Jonathan with a smirk, raising an eyebrow when she spotted Emily trailing behind him. "Who's the sidekick?" she teased, though her eyes softened as she took in the girl's earnest expression. "This is Emily," Jonathan introduced. "She's part of the story." Rachel nodded knowingly, gesturing for them to sit. Once they were settled, Jonathan explained everything from Sarah's condition to the mysterious text messages threatening to derail their efforts. Rachel listened intently, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she jotted down notes. When he finished, Rachel leaned back in her chair, her expression serious. "Sounds like you've got yourself a mess," she said bluntly. "But if anyone can dig up dirt, it's me. Give me a few days, and I'll see what I can find." Jonathan thanked her, relief washing over him. As they parted ways, Rachel handed him a small flash drive. "Here's some preliminary research I did while you were talking," she said casually. "Might give you a head start." Back in the car, Jonathan plugged the drive into his laptop, scrolling through the documents Rachel had compiled. One file caught his eye, a newspaper clipping from nearly 20 years ago, featuring a young woman whose face bore an uncanny resemblance. To Sarah, the headline read, "Local hero saves family from fire." Jonathan froze, his heart pounding as he read the article. According to the report, the woman identified as Sarah Harper had risked her life to rescue her husband and daughter from a burning building. Tragically, her husband hadn't survived, but she and her child had escaped with minor injuries. The name Harper sent a jolt through Jonathan. It matched the surname of Dr. Evelyn Harper, the specialist treating Sarah. Coincidence? Or was this the link he'd been searching for? Beside him, Emily leaned closer, reading over his shoulder. "That's my mum," she whispered, pointing to the photo. "But she never told me about this." The revelation left Jonathan reeling. If Sarah was indeed the same woman from the article, then her past was far more complex than he'd imagined. And if Evelyn Harper was related to hers, the shared surname suggested their connection to each other might explain why Evelyn had seemed so invested in Sarah's case. But none of this answered the bigger question. Why had Sarah changed her last name? And what Tor whom was she running from? As they drove back to the office, Jonathan's phone buzzed once more. This time, the message was different. Meet me at Pier 17. Midnight. Come alone. His blood ran cold. Whoever was sending these texts was escalating, drawing him into a dangerous game of cat and mouse. Emily noticed his sudden tension and gripped his arm tightly. "What does it say?" she demanded, fear creeping into her voice. Jonathan hesitated, torn between protecting her and following the lead. Finally, he sighed. "We need to figure out who's behind this," he said firmly. "But you're staying here. No arguments." Emily opened her mouth to protest, but the look in his eyes silenced her. Reluctantly, she nodded. "Be careful," she whispered. Jonathan forced a smile, though his stomach churned with unease. "I will," he promised. "Stay safe until I get back." With that, he slipped out into the night, leaving Emily behind in the safety of his office. The streets were eerily quiet as he made his way to Pier 17. The distant sound of waves lapping against the shore adding to the sense of foreboding. When he arrived, the pier was deserted except for a lone figure standing at the edge, silhouetted against the moonlight. "Who are you?" Jonathan called out, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. The figure turned slowly, revealing a face he hadn't seen in years. Shock rooted him to the spot as memories flooded back, unbidden and unwelcome. "Hello, Jonathan," the man said, his tone dripping with menace. "Long time no see." The man standing at the edge of Pier 17 was someone Jonathan had hoped never to see again. His name was Marcus Kane, a former business partner turned bitter rival after their fallout years ago. Back then, their disagreement had been explosive, tearing apart not only their professional relationship but also personal ties that once ran deep. Marcus's face was weathered now, his eyes sharp and calculating. Yet there was an undercurrent of desperation in his stance that unsettled Jonathan, even more than the unexpected confrontation. "Marcus," Jonathan said evenly, though his pulse quickened, "what do you want?" The question hung heavily in the damp night air, unanswered for a moment as Marcus took a step closer. "You've been digging where you shouldn't," Marcus replied, his voice low and menacing, "and now you're playing with fire." Jonathan clenched his fists at his sides, trying to keep his composure. "I don't know what you're talking about," he shot back, though both men knew it was a lie. Marcus smirked, clearly enjoying the tension he was creating. "Don't insult me, Jonathan, Sarah Thompson, Evelyn Harper. Does any of this ring a bell?" The mention of those names sent a chill down Jonathan's spine. How did Marcus fit into this tangled web? And why was he so invested in keeping whatever secrets were buried from coming to light? Before Jonathan could respond, Marcus continued, pacing slowly like a predator circling its prey. "You think you can just waltz back into her life after all these years and fix everything? You have no idea what you're messing with." His tone shifted slightly, tinged with something that sounded almost like regret, but Jonathan wasn't about to let his guard down. "What are you hiding, Marcus?" Jonathan demanded, taking a cautious step forward. "If you know something about Sarah Raw, Emily, you need to tell me." Marcus stopped pacing and fixed him with a piercing glare. "It's not my secret to tell," he snapped. "But trust me, you don't want to know. Some things are better left alone." The words echoed eerily similar to the anonymous texts Jonathan had received earlier. He felt a surge of frustration and anger bubbling beneath the surface. "That's not your call to make," Jonathan growled. "Sarah is fighting for her life, and Emily deserves answers. Whatever happened in the past, it doesn't matter anymore. What matters is doing the right thing now." Marcus laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "The right thing? Is that really what you're after, Jonathan? Or are you just trying to ease your guilty conscience?" The accusation hit too close to home, striking a nerve Jonathan hadn't realized was still raw. Memories of decisions made in cold boardrooms, lives disrupted by corporate takeovers, flooded his mind. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was he truly seeking redemption? Or was this just another attempt to rewrite history? But then he thought of Emily's unwavering determination and Sarah's quiet strength, and the resolve hardened within him. "Maybe I am," he admitted. "But if I can help them, then I'll do whatever it takes." Marcus studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, without warning, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Take this," he said, tossing it toward Jonathan. It fluttered to the ground between them, landing softly on the wet wooden planks of the pier. Jonathan hesitated before bending down to pick it up. Unfolding it carefully, he saw that it was a photograph, old and faded, but unmistakably featuring Sarah, a younger version of Evelyn, and himself. They looked happy, almost carefree, standing together in front of a small house Jonathan vaguely recognized. Confusion washed over him as he stared at the image. "What is this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's your past, Jonathan," Marcus replied, his tone heavy with meaning. "A past you tried to bury, and one that's coming back to haunt you whether you like it or not." Jonathan's mind raced, piecing together fragments of memories he'd suppressed for years. He remembered the house now, remembered spending weekends there with friends who felt more like family. But how did Sarah fit into that picture? And why had he forgotten about her entirely? "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he demanded, looking up at Marcus. "Why wait until now?" "Because timing is everything," Marcus said cryptically, "and because I wanted to see how far you'd go to uncover the truth." His gaze darkened, and for the first time, Jonathan detected a flicker of vulnerability behind the bravado. "But listen carefully, Jonathan. If you push too hard, if you dig too deep, people will get hurt, including Emily." The threat was clear, though subtly veiled. Jonathan's jaw tightened as he processed the implications. Was Marcus willing to harm an innocent child to protect whatever secrets he was guarding? Or was he bluffing, trying to scare Jonathan off? Before he could press further, a distant sound broke the silence, faint splash followed by the hum of an engine approaching from the water. Both men turned instinctively toward the noise, their attention momentarily diverted. When Jonathan looked back, Marcus was already retreating into the shadows, disappearing as quickly as he'd appeared. "Wait," Jonathan called out, but it was too late. Marcus was gone, leaving only the photograph and a trail of unanswered questions in his wake. Jonathan stood there for a moment, the cool breeze carrying the salty tenth of the ocean. His thoughts were a whirlwind, each new revelation raising more doubts than answers. Who was Marcus protecting? And why did it feel like everyone involved in this story, from Sarah and Evelyn to Marcus himself, was hiding pieces of a puzzle Jonathan couldn't quite solve? As he finally turned to leave, the weight of responsibility settled firmly on his shoulders. He had promised Emily he'd find a way to help her mom, and now, more than ever, He realized that keeping that promise might come at a cost he wasn't prepared to pay. Back at the office, Emily was waiting anxiously, pacing in front of the window when Jonathan walked in. Her relief at seeing him was palpable, though it was quickly replaced by concern when she noticed the grim expression on his face. "What happened?" she asked immediately, rushing to his side. Jonathan hesitated, unsure how much to share. Finally, he handed her the photograph, watching as her eyes widened in recognition. "That's my mum," she whispered, tracing the image with trembling fingers. "And is that you?" Jonathan nodded slowly, sinking into a chair as exhaustion washed over him. "I don't remember much about this," he admitted, "but I think your mum and I used to be friends a long time ago." Emily looked up at him, her brow furrowed. "Then why didn't you know her before today? Why does it feel like everyone's keeping secrets?" The questions pierced him like daggers, forcing him to confront the uncomfortable reality. He didn't have all the answers. Not yet, as dawn approached. Jonathan and Emily found themselves poring over the photograph and the documents Rachel had provided, searching for clues that might shed light on the mystery. Each discovery brought them closer to understanding the connections between Sarah, Evelyn, and Jonathan, but also deeper into danger. Another text message arrived, this one shorter and more urgent. "Stop now, or Emily pays the price." Fear gripped Jonathan's heart as he read the words aloud, his voice shaking. Emily's eyes filled with tears, but she refused to let them fall. "We can't stop," she said fiercely. "Not now. My mum needs us." Her courage gave Jonathan strength, even as the stakes grew higher. Whoever was behind the threat was growing desperate, willing to cross lines they hadn't dared before. Yet, amid the fear and uncertainty, a glimmer of hope remained. Together, Jonathan and Emily were unraveling a story that spanned decades. A story of love, loss, betrayal, and redemption. And though the path ahead was fraught with peril, neither of them was ready to give up. Not when the truth was finally within reach. Just as Jonathan and Emily were beginning to piece together the fragments of Sarah's past, another unexpected twist threw everything into chaos. A knock at the office door startled them both, sharp and insistent against the quiet hum of early morning. Jonathan exchanged a wary glance with Emily before moving to answer it. Standing outside was Detective Laura Hayes, her expression grim and her posture tense. She held up a badge briefly before stepping inside without waiting for Anne. "Invitation, Mr. Reed," she said curtly, her eyes scanning the room before settling on him. "We need to talk." Jonathan's stomach tightened. He'd dealt with law enforcement before, but never in a situation like this, never when so much hung precariously in the balance. Beside him, Emily instinctively moved closer, her small hand gripping his sleeve. "What's this about?" Jonathan asked, keeping his voice steady despite the unease creeping through him. Detective Hayes didn't mince words. "There's been an incident involving your assistant," she replied, her tone clipped. "Someone broke into her apartment last night. She's shaken but unharmed for now." The revelation hit Jonathan like a punch to the gut. His assistant, Claire, had been nothing more than a bystander in all of this, yet someone had targeted her. Was it a warning? A message meant for him? The implications were chilling. Before he could respond, Hayes continued, pulling out a manila folder from her bag. "This was left behind at the scene," she said, handing it over. Inside was a collection of documents, emails, financial records, and photographs all tied to Innovatic Solutions. But what caught Jonathan's attention most was a handwritten note tucked among the papers. Asterisk, some debts can't be repaid. Asterisk, Emily peered over his shoulder, her face pale as she read the ominous phrase. Who would do this? She whispered, her voice trembling. Jonathan shook his head, his mind racing. Whoever was orchestrating these events wasn't just threatening. They were dismantling his life piece by piece, exposing vulnerabilities he thought he'd long since buried. And now they were dragging innocent people into the fray. Detective Jonathan began, turning back to Hayes. Does this have anything to do with Sarah Thompson or Evelyn Harper? Hayes raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by the specificity of his question. Why would you ask that? She countered, studying him closely. Jonathan hesitated, weighing how much to reveal. Finally, he decided to lay his cards on the table, or at least some of them, because everything seems to lead back to them. He admitted, and I think someone doesn't want me finding out why. Hayes frowned, jotting something down in her notebook. Interesting, she muttered. Because we've been looking into Dr. Harper recently. There are irregularities in her practice that might connect to Sarah's case. The detective's words sent a fresh wave of unease through Jonathan. Irregularities. What did that mean? Had Evelyn done something unethical worse to protect Sarah? Or was she being framed, just like everyone else seemed to be? The questions multiplied faster than answers, each one raising the stakes higher. Irregularities, like what? Jonathan pressed, his voice tinged with urgency. Hayes hesitated, clearly debating how much to share. Let's just say there are discrepancies in patient records, she said finally, and someone very powerful has taken notice. Before Jonathan could press further, his phone buzzed violently in his pocket. It was another text message, this one accompanied by a photo attachment. His blood ran cold as he opened it. The image showed Emily standing near the office window earlier that morning, unaware she was being watched. Beneath it were 2 words. Asterisk ticked up. Panic surged through him, and he immediately turned to Emily, pulling her behind him protectively. We're leaving, he said firmly, grabbing their things, now. Detective Hayes stepped forward, her hand resting lightly on her holster. Mr. Reed, you need to stay calm, she warned. Running won't solve anything. But Jonathan wasn't listening. Every fiber of his being screamed that staying put would put Emily in even greater danger. I'm not risking her safety, he snapped, his voice edged with desperation. If you want to help, then come with us, but we're not staying here. Hayes hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Fine, but let's make one thing clear. Wherever we go, we stick together. They exited the building through a side entrance, slipping into Jonathan's car under the cover of shadows. As they drove away, Jonathan kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights following them. The streets were eerily quiet, the city still waking up around them. Emily sat silently in the passenger seat, clutching the photograph of Sarah and Jonathan tightly in her lap. Do you think my mom knows about any of this? She asked suddenly, breaking the tense silence. Jonathan sighed, gripping the steering wheel tighter. I don't know, he admitted, but I think she might hold the key to figuring it out. Their destination was a safe house owned by Rachel Chen, the investigative journalist who had been helping Jonathan uncover the truth. Located on the outskirts of the city, it offered temporary refuge and hopefully enough time to regroup and plan their next move. When they arrived, Rachel was already waiting, her laptop open and a look of concern etched across her face. You didn't tell me things had gotten this bad, she said pointedly as they stepped inside. Jonathan shook his head, too exhausted to argue. Neither did I, he replied simply. Over the next hour, They laid out everything they knew, piecing together the scattered clues like a jigsaw puzzle missing several pieces. Rachel cross-referenced the documents provided by Detective Hayes with her own findings, uncovering a trail of suspicious transactions linked to Innovatic Solutions. One name kept surfacing repeatedly, Marcus Kane, but there was something else, a connection to Evelyn Harper that suggested she may have been coerced into covering up certain details about Sarah's medical history. It's almost like they're shielding her from something, Rachel mused aloud. Or someone. As the group discussed their theories, Emily wandered to a nearby bookshelf, absently flipping through an old photo album Rachel had left lying around. Suddenly, she froze, her breath catching in her throat. "This is my mum," she said softly, holding up a picture. Everyone turned to look, their expressions mirroring varying degrees of shock. The photograph showed Sarah alongside Evelyn and another man, older, distinguished-looking, and unmistakably familiar. It was Marcus Kane. The realization hit them all at once, sending a ripple of dread through the room. Marcus hadn't just been involved in Sarah's past. He was deeply entangled in it. But why, and what did it mean for the present? Jonathan felt the pieces of the puzzle shifting again, forming a new and far darker picture. If Marcus had manipulated events to keep Sarah hidden or protected, meant there was something far bigger at stake than anyone had anticipated. Something worth killing for. Before they could process the implications fully, the sound of tires crunching gravel outside shattered the fragile calm. Jonathan moved quickly, ushering Emily toward a back exit, while Rachel and Detective Hayes prepared to confront whoever was approaching. Peering cautiously through the blinds, Jonathan's heart sank as he recognized the sleek black sedan pulling up to the house. Its doors opened, revealing armed men dressed in tactical gear. This wasn't a random break-in. It was a calculated assault. Rachel cursed under her breath, grabbing a baseball bat leaning against the wall. "Stay low," she instructed, motioning for Jonathan and Emily to retreat further into the house. Detective Hayes drew her weapon, positioning herself near the front door. The seconds stretched agonizingly slow, each tick of the clock amplifying the tension. Then, without warning, the first shot rang out, shattering the glass of a nearby window. Chaos erupted as shouts filled the air, followed by the pounding of boots on the porch. Jonathan clutched Emily tightly, shielding her with his body as they scrambled toward the basement stairs. Behind them, Rachel and Hayes exchanged fire with the intruders, their movements precise but desperate. "Keep going," Rachel yelled, her voice strained. "We'll hold them off." Jonathan wanted to protest, to stay and fight alongside them, but he knew Emily's safety came first. With a final glance over his shoulder, he descended into the darkness below, praying they could find a way out before it was too late. The basement was cold and damp, the dim light from a single bulb casting long shadows on the concrete walls. Jonathan held Emily close, his heart pounding as he listened to the chaos above them. Gunshots echoed through the floorboards, each one sending a fresh wave of fear coursing through him. He knew they couldn't stay hidden forever. Eventually the intruders would find them, but for now every second counted. "We need to keep moving," he whispered urgently, scanning the space for an exit. His eyes landed on a narrow ventilation shaft near the ceiling, just wide enough for someone small to crawl through. It wasn't much, but it was their best chance. Emily followed his gaze and nodded, her young face pale but resolute. "I can do it," she said firmly, though her voice trembled slightly. Jonathan hesitated, torn between pride and terror at the thought of letting her go alone. But there was no other way. "Okay," he said finally, lifting her up toward the opening. "Crawl as fast as you can. There's bound to be an exit somewhere outside." Emily slipped into the shaft without argument, her determination overriding any fear she might have felt. As she disappeared into the darkness, Jonathan turned back to the stairs, gripping a metal pipe he'd grabbed from a workbench. He wouldn't leave Rachel and Detective Hayes to face this alone, not, if he could help it, upstairs. The fight had escalated into a desperate standoff. Rachel wielded her makeshift weapon with surprising skill, while Hayes used her training to hold off the attackers. Bullets ricocheted off furniture and shattered windows, filling the air with the acrid smell of gunpowder. Despite their efforts, the odds were stacked against them. Just as Jonathan emerged from the basement, one of the intruders managed to breach the door, leveling his weapon at Hayes. Without thinking, Jonathan lunged forward, swinging the pipe with all his strength. The blow caught the man off guard, sending him sprawling to the ground. Before anyone could react further, another figure burst into the room. Marcus Kane. He stood in the doorway, breathing heavily, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. For a moment, everyone froze, unsure what to make of his sudden appearance. "Enough," Marcus shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "This isn't what I wanted." His words hung in the air, heavy with regret and desperation. Jonathan glared at him, his grip tightening on the pipe. "What did you want, Marcus?" he demanded, his tone laced with fury. "Because people are getting hurt because of your secrets." Marcus stepped inside cautiously, his expression shifting from defiance to sorrow. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," he admitted, lowering his hands. "I never meant for anyone to get caught in the middle, not Sarah, not Evelyn, and certainly not that little girl." His confession stunned everyone, including Rachel and Hayes, who lowered their weapons slightly. "Start talking," Hayes ordered, her voice sharp, "or we'll let the authorities decide how much trouble you're in." Under pressure, Marcus began to unravel the tangled web he'd woven years ago. It turned out that Sarah hadn't just been an employee at Innovatech Solutions. She'd uncovered evidence of illegal activities tied to corporate espionage scandal that could have destroyed Jonathan's company before it even took off. Marcus, acting as a mediator at the time, had convinced Sarah to stay silent in exchange for financial support and protection. But when Jonathan acquired Innovatech, those promises fell apart, leaving Sarah vulnerable. To protect her and, by extension, Emily, Marcus had spent years covering tracks, manipulating records, and silencing anyone who got too close to the truth. "But why target us now?" Jonathan asked, still struggling to process everything. Marcus sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "Because someone found out," he confessed. "Someone high up who doesn't care about collateral damage. They've been using me to clean up loose ends, but I couldn't let them hurt Sarah or Emily. Not anymore." His explanation explained the threats, the break-ins, and even Claire's attack, but it didn't fully account for Evelyn's involvement. When pressed, Marcus revealed that Evelyn had known about the scandal from the beginning and had agreed to falsify medical records to keep Sarah safe. It was a risky move, one that put her career on the line, but she'd done it out of loyalty to her sister. Emily's voice startled them all. She had returned quietly, having found an exit and circled back to the house. Her wide eyes were fixed on Marcus, demanding answers. "You mean Dr. Harper is my aunt?" Marcus nodded slowly, his expression pained. "Yes," he confirmed, "and I'm your uncle. Your mum and Evelyn are my sisters." The revelation hit like a thunderclap, leaving everyone reeling. Jonathan stared at Emily, seeing her resemblance to Sarah and Evelyn a new light. All this time, the connections had been right in front of them, buried beneath layers of lies and half-dashed truths. As the dust settled, the group realized they weren't entirely out of danger. Whoever was pulling the strings behind the scenes wouldn't stop until the truth was silenced permanently. With Hayes' help, they devised a plan to expose the conspiracy publicly, using Rachel's investigative skills to gather irrefutable evidence. It was a risky gamble, but it was their only shot at justice for Sarah, for Evelyn, and for Emily. Just as they prepared to execute their plan, one final twist blindsided them all. A video call popped up on Rachel's laptop, the screen showing a familiar face, Evelyn herself. She looked haggard, her eyes red-rimmed, and her voice strained. "I'm sorry," she said softly, addressing the group, "but I've made arrangements to turn myself in. I can't let this destroy any more lives." Before anyone could respond, she added, "Take care of Sarah and Emily, please." Then the screen went black. Evelyn's sacrifice gave them the leverage they needed to bring down the powerful figures orchestrating the attacks. Within days, arrests were made, and the truth came to light, splashed across headlines nationwide. Sarah underwent the experimental procedure successfully, thanks to Jonathan's intervention, and began her recovery surrounded by family, including a newly reunited Evelyn. As for Emily, she found solace in knowing her mother's bravery had saved countless others from falling victim to the same corruption. Yet, as Jonathan stood outside the hospital, watching Emily laugh with her mum and aunt, he couldn't shake the feeling that something remained unresolved. That night, as he reviewed the case files one last time, he noticed a name tucked away in the fine print, a name he hadn't paid attention to before. It belonged to a shadowy investor who had funded Innovatech during its early days. The name sent a chill down his spine. Reed Enterprises. Jonathan sat back, stunned. Somehow, despite all his efforts to uncover the truth, the roots of the conspiracy led straight back to him. Jonathan stared at the name on the document, his mind racing as the implications sank in. Reed Enterprises, the company he had built from the ground up. The empire that defined his life was tied to the very scandal he'd been trying to unravel. It wasn't just Marcus or Evelyn who had secrets. It was him, too. He felt a wave of nausea wash over him, the weight of responsibility pressing down harder than ever before. How could he have missed this? Had he been so blinded by ambition that he failed to see the cracks in his own foundation? For a long moment, he sat frozen, the hum of the hospital lights above him fading into the background. Then, slowly, he reached for his phone and dialed Rachel Chen's number. She answered on the second ring, her voice sharp but tinged with exhaustion. "What is it now, Jonathan?" she asked, clearly bracing herself for more bad news. He hesitated, unsure how to phrase what he'd discovered. Finally, he took a deep breath and said, "Rachel, I need you to dig deeper into Reed Enterprises' early investments. Specifically, anything connected to Innovatech Solutions." There was a pause on the other end, followed by a sigh. "You're not going to like what we find, are you?" she replied knowingly. "Just do it," he urged, "please." As Rachel got to work, Jonathan returned to Sarah's hospital room, where Emily and Evelyn were sitting together, laughing softly over shared memories. The sight warmed his heart, even as guilt gnawed at him. They trusted him to fix what was broken. But how could he make things right when he himself was part of the problem? He lingered in the doorway, watching them for a moment, before stepping inside. Emily noticed him first, her smile brightening as she waved him over. "Hey, Mr. Reed," she called out cheerfully. "Mum says she feels stronger already." Her optimism was infectious, but Jonathan couldn't match her enthusiasm. Instead, he forced a smile and pulled up a chair beside Sarah's bed. "That's great to hear," he said, his tone measured. "How are you feeling, really?" Sarah met his gaze, her eyes clear and steady despite the fatigue etched on her face. "Better," she admitted, "but I know there's still a lot to figure out, and I want to help however I can." Her words struck a chord within him. Here she was, recovering from near death, yet still determined to shoulder the burden alongside him. It made his own hesitation feel selfish. Before he could respond, Rachel called back, her voice tight with urgency. "Jonathan, you need to see this," she said without preamble. "It's worse than we thought." His stomach tightened as he excused himself and stepped into the hallway. What Rachel revealed next was staggering. Reed Enterprises hadn't just funded Innovitikit had actively covered up evidence of the corporate espionage scandal years ago. Legal documents showed that Jonathan's team had knowingly suppressed investigations to protect their acquisition. Worse, the shadowy investor mentioned earlier wasn't an outsider at all. It was Jonathan himself, operating under a shell corporation to shield his involvement. The revelation left him reeling. He leaned against the wall, his legs threatening to give out beneath him. All this time, he'd believed he was doing the right thing, fixing mistakes, making amends, but the truth was far uglier. He had perpetuated the same cycle of exploitation and deceit he now sought to dismantle. The irony wasn't lost on him. When he finally managed to speak, his voice was barely audible. I don't know what to do," he confessed, his usual confidence shattered. Rachel's response was surprisingly gentle. "Start by telling the truth," she said firmly, "to everyone. You've spent your whole life building walls around yourself. Maybe it's time to tear them down." Those words stayed with him. As he returned to Sarah's room, the three women looked up expectantly as he entered, sensing something was wrong. Taking a deep breath, Jonathan pulled up another chair and began explaining everything from the initial scandal to his own role in covering it up. It wasn't easy. His voice cracked multiple times, and tears welled up in his eyes as he recounted the darkest moments of his career. But he didn't stop until every detail was laid bare. When he finished, silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. Emily was the first to break it. "So, what happens now?" she asked quietly, her young face serious. Jonathan looked at her, seeing both judgment and hope in her eyes. "Now," he said, his voice steadying, "we start over. Together." Over the next few weeks, Jonathan took unprecedented steps to address the fallout. He issued a public apology detailing Reed Enterprises' past misconduct and pledging full transparency moving forward. He also donated a significant portion of his wealth to organizations supporting victims of corporate greed, ensuring that Sarah and others like her would receive the care they deserved. The decision cost him dearly, not just financially, but professionally, but it was a price he was willing to pay. Evelyn, meanwhile, faced consequences for her role in falsifying medical records, though her cooperation with authorities earned her leniency. Rather than retreating into shame, she chose to use her expertise to advocate for ethical practices in healthcare, becoming a vocal critic of systemic corruption. Sarah, once recovered, joined her sister in this mission, using her story to inspire change. Their bond, strengthened by adversity, became a beacon of resilience for those around them. As for Emily, she continued to astound everyone with her maturity and courage. With Sarah's health improving, she focused on rebuilding their lives. Determined to create a future free from fear, Jonathan remained a constant presence, mentoring her and offering support whenever needed. In turn, she taught him the value of vulnerability, reminding him that true strength lies in admitting mistakes and striving to do better. Months later, Jonathan stood outside the newly renovated community center, dedicated to helping families affected by corporate negligence. Its grand opening marked a turning point, not just for him, but for everyone involved in the journey. As he watched Emily cut the ceremonial ribbon alongside Sarah and Evelyn, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The scars of the past would always remain, but they no longer defined him. Instead, they served as reminders of how far he'd come and how much further he still had to go. In the crowd gathered for the event, Rachel caught his eye and gave him a small nod of approval. Detective Hayes stood nearby, her expression softening as she observed the scene. Even Marcus, who had quietly faded from view after cooperating with investigators, sent a letter expressing gratitude for the closure Emily and her family had found. Life wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jonathan sat alone on a park bench overlooking the city skyline. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to reflect not on his achievements or failures, but on the connections that truly mattered. He thought about Sarah's quiet strength, Evelyn's unwavering loyalty, and Emily's boundless hope. Most of all, he thought about the lessons they had taught him, that redemption isn't about erasing the past, but learning to live with it, that trust is earned through action, not words, and that sometimes the greatest victories come not from winning, but from letting go. As the stars began to twinkle above, Jonathan smiled faintly, feeling lighter than he had in decades. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was ready to walk it with humility, purpose, and the knowledge that he wasn't alone.